The orbital city of Halcyon 9 never slept. It couldn't. The station's designers hadn't bothered with simulated night cycles. Every corridor was eternally bathed in shifting neon, projected ads, and the faint glow of reactor conduits that pulsed like veins through the city's bones. Traders joked that if the lights ever dimmed, you weren't supposed to sleep, you were supposed to run. He wove his way through the bustling concourse, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets, dodging a merchant whose hovercart overflowed with spiky fruits that smelled suspiciously like engine coolant. A fight broke out behind him, two androids shouting about who had the legal right to sell counterfeit antique blasters. Nobody intervened. On Halcyon 9, counterfeit antique blasters were practically a civic tradition. He stopped in front of a vending machine the size of a small shuttle, its glass compartments rotating endlessly. Inside, dried noodles, packets of powdered broth, and, suspiciously, 3 jars of what claimed to be genuine Martian pickled krill. He stared at them a long while, debating whether buying one would be adventurous or suicidal. In the end, his stomach made the choice for him. Noodles again. Always noodles. The vending machine clunked violently, spat out his order, and nearly crushed his hand in the process. He muttered under his breath, "One day, you'll kill me. And it'll be the most Halcyon 9 way to die imaginable." He carried the steaming bowl toward a ramen shop tucked between a cybernetic limb repair kiosk and a shop advertising guaranteed real gemstones that were probably just recycled Starship windows. Inside the ramen shop, the air was thick with steam, laughter, and the metallic hiss of boiling broth. A dozen customers argued about plasma conduits, bad trade deals, and who cheated in last week's zero-gravity wrestling tournament. He slid into a corner booth, dropped his coat beside him, and blew gently on his noodles. They smelled faintly of burnt rubber and salt, but hunger was a great filter. He was halfway through the first bite when the door hissed open and a gust of cooler air swept in. He didn't look up. Halcyon 9 had a door opening every 5 seconds. But she looked up. She had been weaving through the crowded marketplace outside, following something nobody else could sense. Her people remembered through scent, not just memory but body-deep imprint. To them, smells weren't just smells, they were histories pressed into the air, indelible, unmistakable. Among the fried dumplings, the sharp tang of ozone from exposed power cables, and the sweetness of caramelized protein bars, there it was, a trail so familiar her heart nearly stopped. She slowed, ears twitching faintly. Nobody noticed, the city was full of odd ears, spines, horns, and tails. But to her, those ears betrayed her racing pulse. She pushed past a cluster of gamblers shaking glowing dice, ducked around a trader who tried to sell her genuine antimatter pearls, and pressed through the ramen shop's doorway. The scent hit her like lightning. Not the noodles. Not the broth. Him. She froze, just inside the doorway, staring. The boy, no, the man, who had once dragged her small, trembling body through fire and smoke. The one she'd sworn never to forget. The galaxy had spun thousands of rotations since then, yet here he was, slurping noodles like the universe wasn't currently rearranging itself around his oblivious head. He glanced up at her, mid-bite. For a second, he looked confused. Then wary. His eyes flicked to her ears, the subtle point of them marking her as not quite human. That usually earned her a double take, a stare, or at least a muttered joke about cosplay. He gave her none of that. Just a puzzled blink, like he'd seen her somewhere before but couldn't quite place it. She crossed the room slowly, the clamor of arguments fading as diners noticed the sudden stillness in her stride. She stopped at his table, standing close enough for him to smell the faint trace of something floral and sharp, like rain on metal. He set down his chopsticks. "If you're here to rob me," he said carefully, "I should warn you that my wallet is lighter than my noodle bowl." Someone at the counter snorted with laughter. Her lips twitched, but her voice was steady when she leaned forward slightly and spoke his name. Not the name he used here on Halcyon 9. Not the gruff alias scribbled on docking permits and cheap boarding passes. She used his childhood name, the one he hadn't heard since his homeworld, a name he thought he'd buried in the dust of long-forgotten places. The bowl slipped from his hands. It hit the table with a splatter of broth, steam curling upward. For a heartbeat, the room was silent. And then the memory returned to him with brutal clarity. The smoke, the panicked cries, his arms straining as he carried a fragile, terrified figure through flames. He remembered her ears, how strange they'd seemed, how delicate. He'd thought she was gone forever, swallowed by the tide of time and distance. Now she was here. Older, stronger, eyes shining with recognition. And looking at him like he was the single unbroken thread binding her past to her present. The silence broke. Someone at the counter shouted, "Hey, are you gonna eat that or just stare at her all day?" The shop burst into laughter. The tension cracked, and he seized it like a lifeline. He leaned back, tried to force a grin, and said, "So, do I owe you money, or did I save your cat at some point? Because my memory's bad, but I don't usually forget cats." She blinked, then laughed, a short, startled laugh that rippled into the room. For a moment, her shoulders loosened, her rigid posture breaking into something almost humanly ordinary. But then she leaned closer, her voice low, soft enough only he could hear. "You saved me," she said. "And I have never forgotten your scent." He stared at her. The ramen shop was loud again, people arguing about spice levels, someone knocking over a chair, but for him, the world had narrowed to her words. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. Finally, he muttered, "Well, that's not usually how women introduce themselves to me." She smiled faintly. "How do they usually?" "They usually tell me to leave them alone." Someone nearby cackled, clearly eavesdropping. Her laughter this time was freer, warmer, though her eyes still shimmered with something deeper. She straightened, glancing around the shop, then back at him. "You don't remember everything, do you?" He shook his head. "Just enough to know that this is going to complicate my evening. And my noodles." He looked down at the spilled broth. "Mostly my noodles." "Then let me remind you," she said softly. And when she reached out, fingertips brushing the edge of his sleeve, he felt the weight of years collapsing, the memory of smoke, fire, and desperate promises resurfacing in a rush that made his chest tighten. The ramen shop felt suddenly too small. He sat stiffly in the booth, chopsticks abandoned, while the alien woman slid into the seat opposite him with the easy grace of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. The ramen shop had returned to its usual chaos, traders shouting, steam hissing, cooks banging pots like percussionists in a drunken orchestra, but for him, it all sounded muffled, as though the world had gone underwater. She was studying him with the intensity of a starship scanner, her dark eyes glimmering in the neon haze filtering through the window. Her ears twitched faintly whenever someone raised their voice nearby, like delicate antennae adjusting to interference. He tried not to stare at them. He failed miserably. Finally, she spoke. "You have not changed." He snorted. "I have changed. I got taller. I grew facial hair. I owe more money than ever. That counts." Her lips curved, though her eyes remained solemn. "But your scent is the same. You cannot disguise that. Not from me." He tried to cover his bewilderment with humor. "That's good. Because the last time I checked, I smelled like ramen broth and regret." The corner of her mouth twitched. The serious tone remained, though, and it made him uncomfortable. He wasn't used to being remembered, especially not like this. Halcyon 9 was a city for forgetters, smugglers hiding from creditors, lovers ducking from old flames, scientists who had run from failed experiments and accidentally glowing pets. Being remembered here felt like someone shining a spotlight on you in the middle of a crowded stage. "You knew my name," he said finally. "The real one. Nobody here knows that. I don't use it." "You whispered it to me once, when I was afraid," she replied. You said it so I would not forget your voice while you carried me. He swallowed hard, staring at the tabletop. The steam rising from his half-spilled noodles clouded the air between them. Memories rose with it. The smoke, the heat, his arms cradling a fragile figure. The way she had clung to him, trembling, while flames roared around them. He'd buried that memory like all the others, half for survival, half because he'd convinced himself it hadn't mattered in the long run. Now she was here, across from him, looking at him as if it had meant everything. Before he could think of anything to say, a voice boomed from the counter. Hey, mystery man, you paying for that soup, or is she buying it with eternal gratitude? The room erupted in laughter again. Someone even clapped. He rubbed his face. This is why I don't take dates to ramen shops, he muttered. She tilted her head, ears flicking. Is this a date? The whole table shook as he slammed his knee against the underside. No. I mean, yes, no. It's a public meal situation with noodles and sarcasm. Her laughter bubbled out before she could stop it. It was unguarded, warm, almost musical. For a moment he relaxed, relieved to see her more human than myth. Still, the weight of her presence pressed at him, heavier than the station's artificial gravity. Why now? He asked quietly. Why find me after all these years? Her gaze softened, though her words carried a solemn edge. Because my people do not forget promises. And you are my promise. He leaned back, rubbing the back of his neck. Promises? Look, I was just a dumb kid who didn't want to watch someone burn to death. I didn't sign up for a lifelong contract. Yet you saved me. Yeah, but... You risked yourself for me, she interrupted firmly, though her voice didn't rise above the ramen shop's din that cannot be undone. I told you I would never forget. I meant it. He stared at her, dumbfounded. Well, I meant it when I told my landlord I'd pay rent on time, too, but we all make mistakes. The diners laughed again, apparently, his booth had become the evening's main entertainment. Her lips curved once more, but she didn't waver. Instead, she leaned closer, her voice dropping low. Come with me. Let me remind you why this matters. He blinked. That's the kind of line serial killers use right before luring people into dark alleys. Would you rather remain here, she asked, gesturing at the ramen shop's cracked neon sign, the bickering traders, the endless noise. This is not your destiny. You know it. He opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. She wasn't wrong. Halcyon 9 wasn't anyone's destiny. It was a layover, a floating market of broken stories. He'd been drifting here for years, telling himself it was freedom when really it was avoidance. And now here she was, dragging the past he tried to forget right into his booth. Fine, he muttered. But if this ends with me being dissected in some alien lab, I'm haunting you. She tilted her head again, puzzled. Haunting? It's a human thing. We pretend we can come back as invisible angry spirits to annoy people after death. Her brows furrowed, then smoothed into something dangerously close to amusement. That sounds useful. He sighed, grabbed his coat, and stood. All right, alien destiny girl. Show me what you've got. The ramen shop erupted in applause as if he'd just agreed to a marriage proposal. Someone shouted, "Good luck, buddy." Another yelled, "Don't forget to come back for your tab." He muttered something unflattering under his breath and followed her out into the neon-lit corridors of Halcyon 9. The station hummed around them, its endless arteries alive with commerce and chaos. She walked with the certainty of a starship on autopilot, weaving through the crowd as if every path bent to her will. He trailed behind, dodging merchants waving holographic advertisements in his face. Finally, they reached one of the docking rings. Her ship waited there, sleek, silver, curved like a blade carved from moonlight. Compared to the rusted hulk surrounding it, it looked impossibly alive. Its hull shimmered faintly with bioluminescent patterns, shifting in waves like something breathing. He stopped dead. That's not a ship. That's a glowing space whale someone turned into a bachelor pad. Her ears twitched at the comparison. It is alive, yes. Not a whale. A grown vessel of my people. He gawked. Wait, your ship is alive. As in, breathing? Heartbeat? Feelings? Yes. That's disgusting. And also kind of cool. But mostly disgusting. The vessel pulsed faintly, as though insulted. He held up his hands. No offense, big guy. I'm just not used to flying inside something that could sneeze. She stepped toward the boarding ramp, looking back at him with a hint of challenge in her gaze. Then get used to it. He exhaled, long and slow, and muttered, I should have stayed with my noodles. But he followed her up the ramp anyway, into the waiting light of a ship that was very much alive, and very much ready to change everything. The corridors inside the ship pulsed faintly as if blood ran through them. The walls weren't metal so much as smooth tissue threaded with veins of light, shifting patterns that glowed in response to their footsteps. He pressed his palm against the surface, then yanked it back. It was warm. Yep, he muttered. Definitely alive. And I'm definitely inside something that could burp me out at any second. The alien woman glanced over her shoulder, her braids swaying against the curve of her back. It will not burp you. You say that with a lot of confidence for someone who didn't grow up with horror movies. The ship pulsed again, this time brighter, and he swore he felt it vibrate under his boots, almost like a chuckle. He narrowed his eyes. Great. Now it's laughing at me. A figure stepped into their path. The crew member was tall, armored in a shimmering carapace, with eyes that blinked horizontally instead of vertically. The alien regarded him with undisguised suspicion, then flicked a glance toward her. A rapid exchange of words followed, full of lilting syllables and subtle gestures. The human leaned closer to her, whispering, Is he asking if I'm dinner? Because I'm not dinner. I'm stringy, I'm gristly, and I taste mostly like cheap ramen. Her lips twitched, but she didn't laugh this time. He is asking why you are here. I told him you are my guest. Guest, huh? That's a nice way of saying, confused idiot who stumbled into your destiny cult. The crewman made a sharp clicking noise that didn't sound friendly. She replied calmly, and at last he stepped aside, though his eyes stayed locked on the human as if waiting for him to trip over his own shoelaces. When they reached a central chamber, he stopped in awe. The space was vast, domed, with strands of glowing filaments weaving overhead like constellations. At the center stood what looked like a pool of liquid light, rippling faintly, casting dancing reflections across the chamber. This is, he trailed off, shaking his head. This is way too fancy for me. I feel like I should have dressed up. At least put on a shirt that doesn't smell like soy sauce. This is the heart of the vessel, she said, her voice reverent. It listens. It remembers. He rubbed the back of his neck. I don't like the sound of that. My last landlord also said his walls listened and remembered. Turned out he just drilled holes and spied on us. The vessel pulsed brighter, a gentle hum filling the chamber. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. It accepts you. He pointed at the glowing pool. That thing. It accepts me. Is this how cults start? Because I'm not wearing robes, chanting, or giving up my right to second breakfast. Her expression softened. You are not a cult member. You are part of a promise. There it was again. Promise. The word hung over him like the low hum of the vessel itself. He stuffed his hands in his pockets and tried to lighten the mood. All right, let's assume I don't run screaming back to my sad little apartment on Halcyon 9. What happens now? Do I get a medal? Free snacks? Or just a constant reminder that I smell the same as I did when I was 12? Now, she said, you see my world. Before he could respond, the chamber shifted. The filaments overhead flared, twisting into new constellations. The pool rippled violently, and suddenly he was surrounded by images, memories, he realized, not his own but hers. He saw the fire again, brighter this time, the heat blistering, the smoke choking. But he saw it through her eyes, her fear, her lungs seizing, the panic of being trapped until arms scooped her up, until a boy's voice whispered her name and his own. Then the vision shifted. Her people standing over her as she recovered, whispering of debts and destiny, the ancient belief that saving a life bound it to another across all time. The images faded, leaving him swaying slightly. Okay, he muttered. That was a lot. Usually when I hallucinate, it's because I ate questionable seafood, not because an alien ship decided to turn into a movie theater. She stepped closer, her expression open, vulnerable. Do you understand now? He swallowed, eyes darting around the glowing chamber. I understand that your ship has way better special effects than anything humans can afford. I also understand that I saved you once and you've spent years treating it like some kind of cosmic marriage contract. Which is flattering, don't get me wrong, but I didn't exactly sign paperwork for this. Her lips curved slightly. It is not marriage. It is memory. It is survival. Without you, I would not be. That cannot be ignored. Sure, but you don't see me chasing down the guy who gave me half a sandwich when I was starving as a kid. Imagine explaining that to strangers. Oh yes, this is Phil, he once gave me peanut butter, so now our destinies are intertwined. That earned him a laugh from her, soft but real. He felt a rush of relief. Humor was the only shield he had against the weight of her gaze, the intensity of her belief. The sound of footsteps interrupted them. More crew entered the chamber, each distinctly different in form, some tall and insectal, others with skin like polished stone, one with translucent arms revealing glowing veins beneath. They surrounded the pool, murmuring in low tones, their eyes occasionally flicking toward him. He leaned closer to her. They're talking about me, aren't they? Please tell me they're saying I look heroic and not that I look like a nervous human about to faint. They are, uncertain, she admitted. Great. Nothing like being the galaxy's most awkward guest star. The crew began some kind of ritual, the pool flaring, their voices harmonizing in strange, layered chords. He felt vibrations in his bones, like the entire ship was singing through him. He winced. Okay, full disclosure, this is beautiful but also terrifying. If someone pulls out a knife and asks me to donate blood, I'm out. She touched his arm gently, grounding him. No knives. Just memory. Just truth. The ritual ended with a final flare of light, and the crew dispersed, some still eyeing him warily. The pool dimmed to a quiet glow. He exhaled, slumping. Well, that was intense. 10 out of 10 for drama. But if this is what dinner parties are like on your ship, I'm never making small talk again. Her laugh was softer this time, tinged with relief. You endured. That is enough for now. Endured is a strong word. I'd say, barely survived without crying, is more accurate. But he smiled despite himself, because in her eyes he saw something beyond duty or ritual. Gratitude, yes. Memory, yes. But also a kind of hope that unsettled him more than the glowing, living walls ever could. And as the ship's hum wrapped around them like a heartbeat, he realized he wasn't running anymore. Not yet. Saren Prime hung above the gas giant like a jewel caught in the planet's stormlight. The citadel wasn't built so much as grown, vast spires of crystalline architecture shimmering under shifting auroras, the whole thing suspended by gravitational anchors that hummed with power. Shuttles from hundreds of species darted in and out of docking bays, like fish swarming a coral reef. He pressed his forehead against the viewport of the alien woman's vessel as they approached, staring wide-eyed. That's not a city. That's someone's fever dream after licking too many glowing mushrooms. It is the convocation, she said simply, standing beside him, her ears flicking faintly in the glow of the citadel. Here, the voices of worlds are heard. Great, he muttered. So I'm going to embarrass myself in front of the galaxy. At least my life goal is consistent. The ship pulsed warmly around them, almost like encouragement. He patted the wall half-jokingly. Don't start rooting for me, buddy. You'll be disappointed. The docking procedure was seamless, the vessel's living system syncing with the crystalline platforms of the citadel. Soon they were stepping into a cavernous hall where species of every imaginable shape and size clustered, debating, arguing, laughing, shouting. Some floated in anti-grav fields, others slithered, some wore exosuits dripping with condensation from their aquatic homeworlds. Every word was amplified by the vaulted crystal walls, reverberating in a chorus of chaos. He leaned closer to her. So, where's the snack table? Big important galactic meetings always have one, right? She gave him a patient look. This is not a feast. It is a trial. Oh good, he said, forcing a grin. Trials are so much more relaxing than buffets. They were ushered toward the center dais, where luminous platforms shifted and reformed to accommodate the speakers. She stepped forward, dignified, calm, her presence radiating something unshakable. He, on the other hand, tripped on the last step and barely avoided face-planting in front of an entire galaxy of spectators. A ripple of laughter spread through the chamber. Perfect, he muttered. I'm officially the slapstick act in a space opera. But she didn't flinch. She stood tall, ears glinting in the crystalline light, and lifted her voice so that it rang through the convocation. She spoke of history, of the fire, of how a human child had carried her through death when logic said he could not. She spoke of vows remembered, of bonds that transcended species, of how memory was not weakness but strength. The chamber stirred with murmurs. Some leaned forward, intrigued. Others scoffed. One particularly rotund being with 3 mouths barked, "You build policy on fairy tales." He couldn't help himself. He raised his hand awkwardly. Technically it was noodles and smoke, not a fairy tale. Also, if you'd seen me as a kid, you'd know I was the last person you'd pick as a hero. I once lost a fight to a malfunctioning vending machine. More laughter, but this time it broke tension instead of adding ridicule. A few beings even smiled, or their equivalent of smiling, which in one case looked like a violent sneeze. The debate raged. Arguments hurled across the chamber, some calling for trust, others for isolation, others warning of betrayal. The atmosphere thickened until a sharp, sudden vibration cut through the floor. The chamber's lights flickered. A tremor ran through the crystalline walls. Sabotage, she hissed. Panels of light shattered, revealing intruders, extremists cloaked in jagged armor, their weapons humming with unstable energy. They wanted no treaties, no unity, no bonds between humans and her people. They wanted silence, isolation, the severing of promises. The hall erupted in chaos. Diplomats scrambled, guards surged, energy blasts ripped through the air. He ducked behind a crystalline pillar, swearing loudly. Why does this always happen during speeches? Can't extremists ever wait until dessert? She drew a blade of living metal from her side, the weapon pulsing like a fragment of her ship, and blocked a strike aimed at him. He scrambled up, heart pounding, grabbing a discarded staff-like weapon that was humming dangerously in his hands. I don't know how to use this, he shouted. Point the dangerous end away from you, she snapped, parrying another strike. Good advice. You should put that on a poster. Together, they fought, awkwardly on his part, gracefully on hers. He swung the staff with far more enthusiasm than accuracy, tripping one attacker by accident, then yelping when it discharged a bolt that ricocheted wildly and stunned another extremist in the backside. That was on purpose, he lied loudly. She covered him, slicing down another weapon, her movements fluid, practiced. For a moment he saw her not just as someone bound by gratitude, but as a warrior in her own right, standing fiercely for her people, for the vow that had carried her across stars. At last the extremists were subdued, bound by guards, their plot exposed. The chamber slowly settled, the crystalline walls humming back to life. Breathless, hair singed, he leaned on the humming staff and groaned. Well. That went about as well as a family reunion back home. But she stood tall again, facing the convocation. This is why we must unite, she declared. Because division breeds only destruction. Because memory is strength, not weakness. Because promises, once made, must be honored. Silence stretched across the chamber. Then, slowly, voices rose, not in argument, but in agreement. Not all, but enough. Enough to begin something new. He stood beside her, still panting, still half in disbelief. When the convocation adjourned and the delegates dispersed, he turned to her. So. Did we just save interstellar diplomacy with a combination of heartfelt speeches and me flailing a stick like a drunk fencing student? She smiled, and for the first time, it wasn't weighed with solemnity or destiny. It was simply warmth. Yes. He laughed, shaky but real. Well, that's a resume booster. They walked back toward her ship, the station glowing behind them. The weight of her vow still hung between them, but it felt different now. Lighter, shared. No longer a chain around his neck, but a bridge between them. On the boarding ramp, he paused, looking at her seriously for the first time since Halcyon 9. You know, I spent years trying to forget that day. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was just a kid who got lucky. But, maybe it did matter. Maybe it mattered more than anything. She stepped closer, her voice soft. It did. And it still does. He let out a long breath, a smile tugging at his lips. Guess I'm stuck with you, then. Her ears flicked, amused. Not stuck. Chosen. The ship pulsed warmly around them, as though echoing her words. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was drifting. For the first time, he felt anchored, not by obligation, but by choice. And as the ship lifted from Saren Prime, carrying them into the star-strewn dark, he found himself laughing. Fine, he said. But if we're doing this, you'd better promise me one thing. What? She asked. He grinned. That your ship never sneezes while I'm inside it. The vessel hummed, almost like a chuckle, and together they vanished into the light of the stars.